Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. I think it's about time I get back to my roots, so to speak. Today, I'm going to go full on into my particular area of expertise, strategic communications. So listeners will know that I am a corporate communications leader by day, and many of you out there might think, oh, that's PR. It is and it isn't. Maybe we should retire the phrase public relations altogether, I think. It's got a kind of shifty reputation, kind of smells of spin and press clippings, if you don't mind me saying so. And I've even heard it's marketing's freeloading cousin from some corners. But communications on the other hand, or comms as we like to call it, is an interdisciplinary science. It's an expression of purpose. It's the conscience of the company and the keeper of the message. And now, thanks to CommTech, communications technology, comms has arrived in the modern age. Or has it? Maybe my guest tonight can help us figure that out. She's one of the leading thinkers and practitioners in the emerging CommTech space. And after a decade of advancing digital comms for global consultancy, she took the leap into entrepreneurship and is now co-founder and managing partner of Point 600, a new agency entirely focused on CommTech and modernizing communications. So let's get into CommTech and the changing world of communications with one of the smartest communicators I know, Brittany Paxman. Brittany.
Hello.
It's good to see you.
It's good to see you. Thanks for having me.
How are you? Yeah, no worries. It's been a long time coming. I've been wanting to get Brittany on the show for a while, and over the past year, we've even almost worked together once or twice over the past 2 years. But then Brittany did a little career change, or a little shift, I'd say, and we'll get into that in a little bit, and disappeared for a little while, doing her own thing, building up what was to be Point 600, it turns out. So, we weren't able to necessarily do business together, but I've been after you for years to have a good conversation about CommTech. And here's why. A couple years back, Brittany will remember this. What is it, like 4 years ago, maybe? We started to get involved with something through the Page Society. And Page Society is an organization, a membership organization for chief communications officers around the world. We weren't CCOs at the time, and I'm not one now, but we were kind of recruited by the Page Society as a special kind of, I would call us a committee, right? And a committee for CommTech, for bringing technology to communicators, because 3-4 years ago it was still, and it kind of is still, a new concept, very slow in adoption, and a panel of experts was gathered from across the globe, and much to my chagrin, they asked me to join this committee too. Brittany was there, and that's where I met Brittany, and you guys might remember, my listeners might remember Ethan McCarty, who is the CEO of Integral, an amazing agency in New York. My friend Ethan was on that committee as well. So some really great people, great relationships came out of that experience. But more than that, it really was a knowledge seeking and knowledge creation group, and trying to give some forum to what was becoming a more disciplined area of communications called CommTech. So anyway, that's how I met Brittany. And now, here we are after all this time. And what I was hoping that you could just, tell us a little bit about you, Brittany, because, as a female entrepreneur now and running your own firm, you have a great story to tell. So off to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been honestly the best, most fun thing I've ever done, starting this company. So Yes, I can't recommend it enough. Once you have the resources and the knowledge to go start something, it's a really rewarding experience. So my journey, you mentioned a little bit, I spent the last 15 years or so in consulting firms focused on communications and marketing, and really the intersection of that discipline or those disciplines and technology and data and analytics. And the reason I wanted to go start my own firm was I really, at my core, believe in the power of communications to be a connector. In your introduction, you talked about the role of strategic communications being this science, this interdisciplinary science. And I really believe that's true. And that communications has such an important role not just for organizations, but for society, because it's the connector, it's the persuader, but it's also the opportunity for that information exchange, for knowledge argumentation to happen between companies and people. And I think that's incredibly important. But I'm also a technologist. I have seen the power of data, of technology. And I one day sort of woke up and looked around and thought, we're not keeping up. Comms is so important, but our peers in large organizations are leveraging data and they're thinking about technology differently. And I felt like as a function, we were starting to fall behind. I certainly wasn't the only person, I think, thinking that. I mean, Page Society brought that group together, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
I think exactly to address part of that challenge. And to be clear, it's not because the people weren't capable or the people weren't excellent. Just as a function, the technology wasn't there yet. And so I really saw that opportunity and started investing in it personally. And about a year ago, thought, I think that on my own, I can help more people. And to be clear, I want to help make comms better, but I also want to make the lives of communicators better too. I think a lot of communicators are burnt out. It's a field where you can be working 24/7, where we deal with crisis communications, where we deal with some of the most important things a company does and says. I mean, those of us who all have lived through the pandemic know how taxing this profession can be. And I think there's an opportunity for data and technology to make it a more sustainable profession where excellent people can stay in the profession and that we don't lose the talent to other areas. And so that's sort of the other half of why I wanted to start the company, was to help communicators not only survive, but to thrive. And so we think about data and technology because we think they can make the lives of communicators better and easier. And then in terms of actually starting the company, people ask me why I wanted to start the company. I mean, of course, I think there's a market opportunity, but also, if I'm being honest, I want to live a great life. And so I'm designing a company so that myself, the people who work for me, my partners, hopefully my clients, they live great lives too. An example, we're working a 4-day work week.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's really rare in the agency world because our clients aren't doing that. So we're trying to be really novel with the way we approach that. And we think we deliver a better product, a better service because our people are well rested, they're cared for, etc.
I mean, do you think you could have done the 4-day work week were it not for these last couple of years of craziness that we've been through, or did that create this opportunity for you?
I think it did. It created the opportunity. It certainly put the idea out there. There have been a few countries in the world and companies who have done, deliberate experiments with the 4-day work week and have found that they're just as productive. In fact, you're just not wasting time when you only have 4 days. You get in, you get your work done, you're really efficient, and then you go live a great life.
Yeah.
And I think people that do things outside of work, like you have this amazing podcast, I think they're better practitioners because they bring frameworks and thinking from other parts of their life into the organization. And it's something we deliberately recruit for at my company. We want people who have hobbies and experiences outside of the workplace.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you on that point at all. In fact, I'll probably disagree with you on absolutely nothing during this next hour. But I do think, and recently I've been thinking a lot about this, the value of those outside perspectives, the value of hearing things. I said in the intro that I'm getting back to my roots and talking communications. One of the things that I love about my show is it's kind of my own learning lab and without a set curriculum. And I was recently on a podcast with the great Park Howell, who is the Business of Story is his firm, and he helps people to actually just be great storytellers. And he helps to implement a framework called the ABT, the and but therefore framework, to help people tell stories better. And I think no matter where you are in comms or in any kind of persuasive business, to have that kind of framework where you are, looking at the beginning, middle, and end of a story, teaching people to create a compelling narrative that's going to actually come to a conclusion and draw people in is a very good thing. And, Park and I were talking. The point is that I have been using my show as, a great kind of release for me in some ways, like to talk to people because I love talking, but also because I really love the people I talk to and, to learn. But he helped me see it in a slightly different angle, that we are all experts in a lot of ways, right? Especially once you get to a certain point in your career.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important to think in tangents sometimes. It's really important to go outside of your swim lanes. You can think of 1,000 metaphors for this,
Mm-hmm.
to go out of your zone, whatever. And that's in some ways a cure for the curse of the expert. You're so focused in on where you are, and you have to kind of be a little bit more of malleable mind, let's say, like it's a mindset thing in some ways, but trying to read another communications book, it will help me, right? There's a return on that. But to read a book about, I don't know, let's say jobs to be done theory, which is a business strategy theory, has a much greater return on investment, right? So thinking of it that way, I love this idea of being able to bring kind of separate or voices from outside the profession. That said, here I am talking to you, a communications person, going not necessarily against the whole expertise thing, but I think sometimes at the same time, it's really important to dig deep into where you're at. Mm-hmm. And, if you're going to bear the curse of the expert, you might as well be the expert that is cursed, right? You need to have that expertise and keep it sharp. So CommTech is one of those things that I think even experts in communications still don't get, still aren't really there for. They're still not quite ready. But you have now started your company. Some of the things you'd said in the rationale, the why, your purpose was driving you. I mean, there's a lot there that I want to touch on and pick on. I'm just not sure where to start, so I'm just going to start somewhere. Mm-hmm. And you said something about you saw that our peers were leveraging data in a different way, mm-hmm. And looking at marketing or looking at communications, we were lagging, we were behind. Mm-hmm. I'd like to pick on that a little bit because I think it's true. But also because I come from a very mixed, like I'm interdisciplinary myself. Right. I've been in marketing comms so when I started to shift more into comms direction, I was surprised that a lot of my coworkers or colleagues or peers really were still like thinking, hey, no, we got to spend 80% of our budget to pay this person to get on the phone and sell a story to a reporter. Now there's a problem with that. Not only because it doesn't work, but I mean, that's sort of what I was alluding to earlier when I just said, it smells of press clippings and so on. I mean, it's a little old school, and that's not going to set us up to be good partners to a business. So, why do you think it was that lag happened?
I think there's a bit of a chicken and the egg sort of situation happening. If I were really to take a step back and analyze the market, I think it is because historically communications has had smaller budgets. And so the technology vendors didn't cater to them. And so I think marketing, frankly, customer service is one of the peer functions that I think is way ahead on this. Customer support, sales, way ahead, because technology vendors said, I can make money if I can solve problems for those parts of the business. And those vendors, they didn't really understand communications. And I'd love to dig into that a little bit more later, because I am not really convinced that they today understand communications either.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
And so that's where it was kind of the push and the pull. I don't know that marketers first went out and said, oh, I need the data. Give me the data. I think products were made that were easy to use, that had beautiful user interfaces, and that delivered insights. And then they sold that to marketers, to salespeople, to customer service leads, and said, if you use our product, you're going to get more value. So I think it was very much an outward in, and that comms just wasn't targeted.
Yeah.
And that's why I say I don't really think it was comms' fault, actually.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean by the chicken and egg thing. And yeah, it wasn't comms' fault entirely. Although part of me thinks that, and when I say we, I'm saying the comms industry, kind of put ourselves in a bad place, or in a very in a very inferior place, like subservient to marketing. Couldn't necessarily prove the use to our business. We were only important when some crisis happened, right? And trying to get what we could for free. Hey, we got this great coverage in the Times. And for some businesses, that was really successful, right? For some businesses, oh goodness gracious, we have the most amazing CEO. We have a product that people would die for, and there's still no real kind of action on the internet. There's no competition for people's eyeballs. So reporters are really interested in what we have to say. So therefore, that's where we're going to hone our skills. But then everything changed. Consumer competition happened. People's attention diverted into 1,000 different ways. Marketers understood this because they had to. And then you're right. The tech vendors, I think, were there to say, I bet we can make a mint if we could understand now this very divergent and disparate audience. If we can get those marketers to reach those people a little bit better, we'll make a lot of money, and then help marketers to create a business case where they can then ask for more money internally as well, with these beautiful interfaces, beautiful graphics, all this kind of stuff makes it easy for a CEO to understand. And this is a whole thing that happened over many years. I think you're totally right. And the comms people are just sitting in the back going, yeah, but I got a New York Times article, and then we start to see like the meltwaters of the world start to pop up where, oh, well, at least we can, if we know that marketers are like starting to measure stuff, well, we can too, right? We can see how many articles we got. And, it started to snowball from there, but I think the marketers were so far ahead. Like I said, the comms people something had to change where seeing the value of a media hit, right, versus any other consumer interaction really had to change, I think, now that we're discussing it, right? So, the comms people were really heavily focused on how much coverage did I get? And the marketers were focused on, okay, how am I making more sales happen? And which is going to be a much more persuasive argument internally in a company, right? It's going to be it's going to be the sales. So once the comms people start to ask themselves, wait a second, we have to start tying this to actually like customers and revenue and things like that. That's when I think, we start to see some mindset changes.
I think that's right. And I think it's easier for marketing for a couple of reasons. One, it's just so much closer to the transaction. And if you can, every marketer, not every marketer, but many marketers, right? We're just last click attribution. It's like they went from my thing straight to a sale. So I get to take credit for all of that revenue, and that ignores the landscape that the communications created, that the interactions with the business in other ways, with salespeople, with customer service agents, with the website, all of those things influence that decision. And so I think last click attribution separately is just like a, useful but too simple model.
Oh yeah.
But I also think from the way that we are trained, marketing was more primed to adopt these skills just as the individuals. I mean, marketing, I'm just thinking about placing a Facebook ad or posting, something in social. The day-to-day work of a marketer pretty quickly became digital, right? You're having to interact with technology in a much more sophisticated way. And I don't want to discount the importance of relationship building. Like, I think that's super important. And I think that the skills of communicators are also still super important. But marketers and other parts of the function, I mean, customer service, you started to have these sophisticated queues that you're working in that are prioritizing customers in a digital way. That lent itself to saying, awesome, let's add on top of that some technology to make this easier. Let's start doing some reporting. So the data was sort of naturally there. On the comm side, the day-to-day work wasn't moving digitally so quickly. And I think that made it so that day-to-day communicators just didn't have those same opportunities to adopt technology and data. It really requires deliberate intention. Even today, I think a communications function that wants to really adopt CommTech, I think they're going to outperform their peers, but they have to do it deliberately because it's relatively easy to kind of just keep going, not make changes, have your budget get smaller each year, have your impact get smaller each year, and and just kind of go with that.
It's very, very hard for organizations to move in that direction. For comms teams to do that, we know this. And I'm fortunate to be working with a company where we do believe in, and we know that it's important to shift to, or at least start to kind of implement more and more of the technology that we need. And yet it's a large global team. It's not an easy transition. It's not something that people are doing easily or sometimes not even very well, right? So there's just so much there that I think, just going back to something you said, like the skills that communicators have, right? The stuff that we're looking at, it takes a little bit of a jump, a leap of faith in some ways, but also like a change in perspective to understand what's measurable and what isn't. So what I mean by that is the communicators in us, we're looking at, I mentioned coverage earlier, right? You said relationships, relationship building. Yes. Relationships are the domain of communications, like real relationships that matter, because the other thing about communications, reputation, right? Looking at reputation, we're stewards of reputation. And as a steward of reputation, that's where crisis and things like this come in. We really started looking at how people are talking about us, right? And it's important when rumors start to spread, or it's important when there's good news and people are starting to talk. So when we start to be more concerned about how people are talking about us, then, that's when social media started to really rise, and you started to be able to look at those conversations digitally. So we couldn't before. Mm-hmm. So all this time, the marketers are making all this progress because they're just like getting these email transactions, or there's other ways to, you're right, it's close to the transaction, right? So there's so many different ways that people are behaving online, and even in store, where there's a digital kind of imprint that happens and it can be measured, and so much stuff can be learned with that. But whereas with a conversation, we're talking about something, there's a lot of qualitative mixed into that quantitative, and it's much more daunting, I think, to try to measure that. And it's also harder to prove the immediacy of that to the business, right? So I think, we're focused, we communicators were starting to focus on this stuff. Hey, it's important. But because of the legacy way of doing our jobs, that day to day that you're talking about, we would say it's important, but couldn't kind of quantify it in any way that the marketers are trained to do. Mm-hmm. Other thing about the marketing training is that those folks, a lot of them, they got quantitative training, mm-hmm. right? They see a spreadsheet. They're like, oh, great, a spreadsheet. A communicator sees a spreadsheet. They're like, oh, I can do a matrix of words here, right? So it's I'm really belittling our profession a little bit, but I think you see what I'm saying. There's a whole quantitative and qualitative difference in the way that people approach things, and where we were focused and where we are focused in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I've unloaded so much on you. I'm sure you have a comment or two.
I agree with the direction of what you're saying. I do, maybe to kind of give communicators a little bit of credit here. Yeah. I think there is so much value in that qualitative part. And that's actually where I think communications can get ahead and can leapfrog, because comms is never going to leave the qualitative behind. Whereas I think sometimes, if you're just quant, you can get lost in the numbers. You can make bad decisions because you're really not using your expertise to interpret that information. And so at least our firm, the reason we started this is because I think my background in communications, my business partner's background in communications, we're comms first, but we have classical training in technology and data, and we look at data through a comms lens. And I think there's so much opportunity for our profession to find insight and take action in ways that really drive value for organizations, because we have that qualitative first, but not qualitative only look at
Yeah.
the data.
So and I think that's totally right. And I do want to, again, sort of apologize to all my communications colleagues. I don't mean to belittle or judge, but I'm a little harsh because I've been in those boardrooms, and I'm sure you have too, Brittany, where you're talking to a CEO or some executive about what I need as leading a comms team, and they're like, no, we've already decided your budget for next year. What you're talking about is what marketers do, and you guys focus on the message, focus on the narrative, focus on crisis, these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And while we do focus on that message, narrative, crisis, where do you think we get the information for these things? Where do you think, or where do you think we should get the information? Which I think is probably a better reason to ask. So getting into CommTech a little more,
mm-hmm.
the technology that we are able to adapt now that wasn't fully available that long ago,
mm-hmm.
And I think it really only started to get like, holy crap, we can really analyze like qualitative interaction recently. Like big data had to happen first, and like things like Radian 6 and
oh wow, Radian 6, you're taking me back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking, like where you had to look at Sysomos and do some kind of analysis and then plug it into some sheet where you had to have some genius put in formulas to crush information. Then you got to do all kinds of things just to get to a conclusion that is now available through 3 clicks on Talkwalker, for example. So like there's what we're looking at has changed, and the interfaces have changed quite a bit, but it took a while to figure out we can quantitatively look at qualitative things.
Mm-hmm.
And by qualitative things, I'm generally referring to conversations. And where I'm going with this is something you said earlier about that, the last click attribution, marketers kind of get credit for that. Salespeople get credit sometimes. But that last click attribution at the bottom, essentially at the bottom of the funnel, if you want to imagine the funnel, I know that the funnel isn't necessarily the greatest model or the most accurate model anymore, but let's just, for simplicity's sake, say the user journey ends at a point at the bottom of this funnel because there were more at the beginning and less at the end. Mm-hmm. So the user at the end makes that click and it's attributed to your marketer. But the thing is, right, it depends on, of course, what you're selling and what your industry is. But hey, when everything's all healthy and going well, everything's great, the brand is like behaving like gangbusters and you can't like give your product away fast enough, that's fine. But when things start to change or when there's any kind of adjustment to the marketplace, what's happened? You have nothing happening at the beginning of those people's journey. You've put all of your money at the end, so how are you going to start to get people interested in what you're doing? In the old days, you'd run some ads. That doesn't happen now.
Mm-hmm.
So CommTech, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we know what those people at the beginning of their journey are thinking, right? How do we know what they're talking about? And is it the role of the communicator to get in there, figure that stuff out, and start to guide people towards the long-term relationship with the company, which ultimately will hopefully result in a sale? I say yes.
I'd say yes. I think that's one of the roles. I think when I explain communications or my view of what communications is to people who are not in the industry at all, I think communications is definitely top of the funnel, is beginning of the journey. But comms is also responsible for relationships with everyone who's not a customer.
Yes.
And
that's an incredibly important point, by the way, Brittany. I want to when I do an audiogram of this, that might be it. That's just going to be the pull quote right there.
Nice.
Yeah. It's fantastic. So go on. Sorry.
Yeah. And so I think there's 2 things there. First, those other people influence the customers tremendously. But second of all, they are also independently important to the business. I mean, you're thinking about legislators, thinking about general community members, thinking about investors, employees. I mean, how important are our relationships with employees right now? More important than they've ever been. And comms is usually responsible for the relationships with all of those people. And, and partners, even other companies that you work with. And the economy is so interconnected now between companies, between all of these different stakeholders. And I really think comms is the only one looking at those people's journeys.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if, at the very least, we're looking at those people's journeys to find out what is important in the world. Like, what is important, and our message as a company, as a brand, is about a lot more than a product. We have a mission to achieve in the world. We have a purpose to fulfill in the world. Our customers aren't the only people who are interested in that purpose, right? That purpose needs to go beyond our customers. We don't, right now I'm at Lixil, and we don't, we're not fulfilling, sanitation needs or uplifting people from the depths of horrifying sanitary conditions because we want them to be our customers, right? We're doing that because that's what we do.
Right.
And the business powers our ability to do that, right? Not the other way around. So it's, to get that message through to customers is important, but really to get that message through to the world, I think is equally as critical to the long-term success of the business.
I completely agree. Another thing I want to hit on that you said earlier, you were alluding to about crisis.
Yeah.
I think so much of our measurement, often in the use of MarTech, marketing technology, and CommTech, communications technology, is we're looking at what's the positive value that we're adding, right? How are we getting more people into the funnel? How are we increasing reach? How are we, all the way through? But where I think there's a big opportunity is comms is not just advancing, but it's preventing the backslide, right? A crisis is going to take away. And you can forget everything else downstream if you have a major crisis that you don't handle well. And so a lot of it is, if it's going well, you don't see it. But I spend a lot of time thinking about, well, how do we measure that? How do we measure the impact of all the bad things that we're stopping from happening? And to be clear, I don't just mean because we put a bow on it or we spin it, right?
Right.
It's actually that communicators are at the table saying, we should not even make that decision because it could harm our reputation. And so 7 steps before something bad happens, comms stops it from happening. And I think that's such an important part of the role of communications that, I think our peer functions maybe don't understand that role that comms is playing.
I mean, it doesn't, it's what have you done for me lately often with a lot of our peer functions. And that's not a bad thing. They just have their concerns, right? What you're saying is also incredibly important. Obviously, we are the stewards of the reputation, right? And we have to be looking at what's bubbling up and stay ahead of that. And you couldn't do that before with, just without seeing something break or without getting a phone call or a tip, Now, though, we should be able to tell, at least get some inklings of negativity or of some or things that are dangerous or potentially dangerous by paying very close attention to conversations, right? To the actual written word on, whatever 150 million websites, or looking at, what people are saying in social, looking at what our customer service people are reporting, these kinds of things. This is all data points that, are, happening, but need to be predictive. And that's hard to do on a good day, but impossible to do without the technology to sort of start to put all these things together in ways that are understandable and draw out insights.
Yes.
I couldn't agree with you more about pretty much everything you're saying. And, I feel like that whole idea of communications being responsible for relationships, something communicators need to get better at communicating internally and inside companies. But CommTech or any of, and let's break that down in a second. Like, so the tools that we have available to us are the things that we can use to validate these presumptions and assumptions and all the umptions, right? I do want to kind of step back just a second, because we've been talking about this stuff like real theoretical. It's been a lot of fun, and I love this conversation, believe me. And it echoes conversations I have all the time with thinkers in the field. And I'm wrong as often as I'm not, but I really do think it's important for us to just continue to push those boundaries and try to help people understand that technology is our friend, and we need to figure out where it belongs at every step of our journey, or every step of our workday, so that day-to-day work that you referred to before is actually melded with CommTech, right? Or where technology becomes our enabler, and we are able to use those tools at every step in the way, in the same way that your relationship marketer is gonna have Salesforce open on their desk all the time.
Yep.
So let's talk about that for a second. What is a typical or maybe prototypical or becoming typical, like, CommTech ecosystem, right? And for your like typical communicator, where does it start, and where does it never? I don't think it ends. It kind of loops back, but where does it go? So, can you illustrate that for us?
Yeah. So before I do that, I just want to say, CommTech is as much the actual technology as it is the methods and the mindset of leveraging that technology. And I think too many people go, okay, CommTech, I'm going to go call a bunch of vendors and get a bunch of tools. Great. And then I can check that box. It is really about thinking in a more programmatic, technologically enabled way. So
hang on just 1 second, because that mindset issue, we've touched on a couple of times so far now. And I know I said I wanted to hear the whole thing. But first, I want to touch on that mindset, because let's establish what that mindset looks like before we talk about, okay, once you have this mindset, this is the kind of stuff that you should do, right? Now, we talked about old versus new, and there's legacy thinking, and there's old school comms people, and very technology focused comms people. But what is that mindset that we need as a communicator, in your mind?
In my mind, it's thinking like a programmer, like a developer. It doesn't mean you're going to write code, but when someone is, a software developer, I'm not a software developer. I dabble in some SQL and some Python, but so no one should think I'm an expert in that necessarily. But you write a function or a method, and that function does something. It does lines of code. Once you do that, once you write that, whenever you want to do that thing, you just call that function. You don't write all that code again. You write it one time and then you call it. And so that's what I mean. It's about saying, what are these small, repeatable parts of my day, parts of our work that we can write into a method and then call in the future, instead of reinventing the wheel every time. And being a communicator is hard work. And the work, in my opinion, is mental. It's mental, right? It is mentally taxing. So if we can free ourselves up from making lots of decisions, because we can let the technology kind of track that stuff for us, then we can use our mental capacity and our work energy to make strategic communication decisions. So I want the technology to track my to-do list. I want it to tell me which emails are most important. I want it to let me know the status of projects, so I don't have to ping my colleague and say, hey, where are we on this? I want to know that reporter who asked a question, that someone is on that. So I don't have to spend time worrying about that. So in my mind, technology, the mindset shift is not that technology is going to do everything for us, but that it's going to take the stuff that's super repeatable, that we are wasting mental capacity on, and help us with that, so that the communicators can spend their time being strategists. That's what I mean when I say a mindset shift. The other thing I mean is I'm constantly telling people, you should ask yourself all the time, there's got to be a better way. You should say that to yourself. There's got to be a better way. And usually there is in the technology that we're all using. I mean, I use Excel very frequently. Just imagine if you used Excel, but you didn't use formulas, right? And you were like, you had a hand calculator and you were like adding up the numbers between two cells and then you were typing it in that other cell. You might think to yourself, there's got to be a better way. And you might Google how to find the sum of two cells. And then the Microsoft Excel sum formula would pop up and you could now use that. And how much time have you saved?
That's programming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. And so that's what I think about is most of the CommTech tools that we have so much robust functionality that is not used.
Yeah.
Because we're not saying there's got to be a better way.
It's true. It scares the hell out of people. I mean, and this is another thing I might add to the mindset is an openness. Like there's a sort of more kind of coaching like mindset where we're talking about the difference between having a fixed mindset and a learning mindset, right? Or and growth mindset. And you absolutely need to have that growth mindset because it's all experimentation and failing and making mistakes, but also, there's a fear, I think, of like communications people, notorious perfectionists.
Yes.
Right. That's why we work so hard in many ways. When you get a group of writers together and or you get a group of people together and they have an important function to fill, but their core skill is writing, they're going to be perfectionists. There's nothing you can do about it. They're writers. They're going to want to keep making that thing better. Right. So it's hard to kind of accept that, we're going to adopt a technology and we have to trust it. We have to be willing to cede some of our work to it.
Right. Or even start to tolerate a little bit more error.
Yes.
When I was when this was not automated 10 years ago, we're doing sentiment analysis and we would present some really complex analysis, a lot of it hand coded for accuracy. And we'd present some reports and you'd have a room of communicators. Instead of saying, okay, what does that mean? And what changes should I make? They would say, give me the list of articles. And they would go through, 100 articles and try to find one whose sentiment was wrong. And then they would go, oh, your data's not reliable. Get out of here.
And you're reminding me, this happened to me today. Yeah. And it wasn't a communicator necessarily, but today I'm looking at an analysis of mentions of a particular brand over the last 13 months, right? So a very basic kind of function of many of the social listening tools that we have available to us, right? But it's garbage in, garbage out, right? Or it's quality in, quality out. Let's flip it to the positive, right? So, you have to input what you want this tool to look for. It's not going to get magically do everything right. There's a little bit of programming in that sense, right? You have to say, you know what? I want it to look for bananas, but not every banana. I want it to look for bananas, not green bananas.
Right.
And not plantains. I don't want plantains to show up in my search. So you have to figure out how to string this all out. And every time you do a search, it's going to get better.
Yep.
But the first couple times, it's going to be a lot of noise in the system. There's going to be a lot of inaccuracies. But there's no question that even that very first search for bananas will, on the whole, point to a trend, like a directionally right thesis. You can make a really good hypothesis even on a weak search if you have enough to look at. So I was trying to explain this to somebody today. They're like, yeah, but you're picking up, green bananas here. Obviously we weren't looking for bananas, but I'm saying it
came in verde bananas and you're like, that's green.
That's green.
Right.
And, this is, look, all the mentions on this day are all about the green. I can't make a judgment based on this. Like, let's talk it through. Let's look at this. Exactly. There's a lot of utility here that we're missing.
Right. And I think this is where people who have a statistical background, right? You are used to a margin of error. You are used to saying, Like, look at political polling. No one says that's going to be the exact number. They know that there is some error built into it. Now, I'm not saying that there's a certain amount of error you can tolerate and a certain amount that you can't. And I'm not suggesting we should not care about the quality of the data. But I do think this is another hindrance to the adoption in communications because, like you said, comms people are perfectionists without much tolerance for error, and data sort of definitionally has error.
Yeah.
And so we have to get people, like maybe we need like a communications therapy or something about, just being a little bit more okay with the data not being 100% perfect and instead looking for the insight there.
Yeah. And I also tried to explain it once to one of the people that I worked with at the time. Data, if you're looking at sales numbers, if you're looking at like transactions, or if you're looking at, the number of people that attended an event, right? Or, the level of sound, like there's certain things that are quantitative and therefore it's a number, it's yes or no. But when you're looking at conversations that are complex strings of words and interactions, right? I'm sorry, the AI isn't there yet, but it's just not yet there yet. And you have to understand that's where our value comes in as a communicator, to look at, okay, you just analyzed, 30,000 conversations with a click of a button. And now you see these, maybe it results in some word clouds, right? Well, there's tools that do this. Maybe the result of this, 30,000 conversations, the result is a word cloud that tells you the themes of those conversations. And looking at it, it's like, oh, that can't be right. There's some stuff coming up in that word cloud. It's totally off base. Some people are like, it doesn't work because it's off base. I said, look, let's go a couple of clicks over. Let's just look at this. But because that's where your value is. You can start to look and see, oh, all right, this is happening a lot. This is happening a lot. That conversation is not relevant. This is happening a lot. Oh, that's not relevant. But you can start to you have to have a qualitative approach to that quantitative data. And only then can you really make the best use of these kinds of tools that are examining what is fundamentally a qualitative, situation. So
yeah,
I don't know.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
I think a couple of things. First, your point that's where the value is, that's where our value, the comms person's value, is completely correct. And in my mind, it increases the value of a communications expert. The data increases their value. It's not competitive with. The other thing, I think this is in Adam Grant's book, The Originals, the idea that when we're building algorithms, actually what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the computer to be as smart as the expert. We're trying to mimic the expertise that exists in the human.
Yeah.
I have a client right now where we're building a model where we are trying to assess the value that certain stakeholders are getting from that client. And we've created sort of a point scoring system. And we are asking the people in the organization who are expert at relationships with those people what their intuition is about the value. Because we are trying to mimic their intuition. And so a lot of times, actually, what we're trying to do is enhance and learn from the human, not the other way around always. And I think that's a misconception that data just means, you just have to accept the data without question. Actually, you have to be an informed analyst, an informed consumer of the data to really get the maximum value.
Yes. And this kind of goes a little bit back to what we're saying about people being scared of CommTech in general. It's because they see this kind of information and they don't have the experience or the understanding necessarily to parse it, to think it through and go, okay, I can draw some conclusions from this. So it takes, there's a big educational effort that we have to go through. And I know you're part of Page Learning Lab, as I am. There's a lot of really great sources out there. I'll just say that this is one of my kind of missions in life these days, is to help people who are in, like, either on my team or people I interact with globally in communications, to understand that delivering intelligence is just as important as, kind of delivering a message. The intelligence that we gather is not just the domain of our insights team or market research. Like intelligence that we see is of a different kind and equally as important, but only we see it because we're analyzing conversations and qualitative things like this. So without going to a focus group, without going to like, spending all that money. I'll get off my soapbox now. I do want to kind of go back again and I'll try one more time because we keep getting sidetracked and that's my fault. Yeah, it's my fault. Let's lay out what that ecosystem looks like.
Yep.
Right. So you're a communicator and you want CommTech or you're trying to figure out how this works. Let's illustrate it for our listeners.
All right. So I have a little bit of an unconventional place to start. I think communicators should start with project management. And because one, that's technology that probably already exists in the company and is not unique to communications and is not expensive. And so if you can get effective project management tools in place, you're task tracking, you're getting out of email, you're communicating more effectively, that will get people into the CommTech mindset. And so, and you get incredibly big returns fast. Because now people aren't worried, oh, I forgot to do a thing. All my tasks are in my email. Where's everything happening? So I like to start with project management. Then when you get specific to CommTech, and so project management, that could be like an Asana, Trello, tools like that.
Yeah.
Then I think it's about external listening tools like you've been describing. So social media listening, media monitoring, seeing what media broadcasts are saying about your company. You mentioned Talkwalker. Meltwater is another one I like in this space. Brandwatch, which was acquired by Cision. Cision is another big suite of tools like this. And that's where you can pretty quickly get some insight. And the nice thing about those tools is you can get insight even if you don't extract the data. Like you leave the data in the tool, you can get a lot of insight.
Yeah.
To me, that's not the end state. You want to be pulling that data into a data lake or a data warehouse and doing your own analysis, combining it with other data sources. But you can get a lot of insight very quickly in those type of tools. And I also think where a lot of value comes from is effective tagging and segmentation strategies. So then I think it's about content management. So getting like a Falcon or a Sprout Social or a Sprinkler where you are able to draft your content, you're able to send it for approvals. Maybe there's some brand governance in there where there's a selection of, images that you're allowed to use. And then from that is campaign deployment. So campaign tracking, deployment, et cetera. And then you can get into the CRM. And I'm really just going to say the RM tools because it's not just customer relationship management, but we talked earlier about how communications manages relationships with many stakeholders. As many stakeholders as there are, you can track those relationships. Those are kind of the data inputs. And then you get into your internal tools as well. So your intranet. The intranet is often one of the biggest pieces of technology of CommTech that comms is responsible for. I had one client who once told me that for every 40 people their company employed to work on their .com, their external site, they had one person for their intranet. It is so underinvested in. And then you've got your internal tools, internal social networking tools or social communication tools like Slack, Yammer, Teams. Microsoft Teams is actually, I think, an incredibly important CommTech tool if it's deployed in the organization.
We're using Workplace for our internal comms most.
Great.
Biofreaks.
And then those are kind of, in my opinion, the majority of the unique to comms tools. But where I'm not seeing a lot of comms functions invest just is then your ELT, ETL tools, your data pipelines, your transformation tools. And those are tools like Matillion, Rivery, Fivetran, tools like that. And then a data warehouse, data lake, common place for storage, that gives you the single source of truth. A huge challenge comms has is, hey, Talkwalker is telling me one thing, Brandwatch is telling me something else, Incision is telling me something else. Your executives are getting 4 different numbers and now they just don't believe your data, right? And then lastly, business intelligence tools for visualizing it all. My favorite is Tableau, but Looker is another popular one. Microsoft Power BI, if you have the Microsoft suite, you probably have that tool internally. And to me, the power of that is you've broken down the silos. You're combining your media data, your social media data, Oh, I remembered one more I got to throw out there. Reputation tracking. So like
Oh yeah.
survey-based reputation tracking, like a morning consult or a YouGov.
Yep.
And that's it. That's my checklist.
It's a heck of a list. And I'm just like going through where I've had. So first of all, I will say, like, several years ago, we were on the CommTech committee, and I'm regarded as an expert in some ways in CommTech, but I stopped probably about 5 or 6 in here. And then the rest of it is like now not my, like, I just don't know what it is exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But when I've spoken to you about it, I get it. I just don't, we're not there yet. A lot of places, like in implementing, like ELT, ETL tools, that kind of stuff. So like really that's going deeper and deeper and taking things to yet another level. But everything else that you're describing, they're achievable steps with not that much of an investment or staff. I mean, internet can take a little bit of cash, but some of the stuff you can do like on a shoestring, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
You said you're talking about project management, external listening, right? We talked about that. A lot of my time is focused on external listening, figuring it, like trying to understand what's happening at that top of the funnel so we can identify topics and we can identify, trends, topics, things that we should be talking about, attitudes, et cetera, right? Just pre-strategy, the inputs that we need.
Mm-hmm.
Content management is so often overlooked.
Yes.
People have a spreadsheet or editorial calendar.
How many times does approval go to someone's inbox today?
I can't even tell you. You try to be agile where we don't need many approvers, but there's always a bottleneck somewhere. Right? Always. And you mentioned, so campaign deployment. What are some of the tools around campaign deployment?
So those are similar to content management. So if it's just like social campaigns, you're often looking at like a Falcon or a Sprinkler.
Oh, right.
But then if you get a little bit broader, you've got like the Adobe suite, Adobe Experience Manager, which is, a tool more often used by marketers, but that can be really effective. And then combining that with like an email marketing tool sometimes.
Like a HubSpot type of a situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Marketing automation. Yeah.
Yep.
Or communications automation. Maybe it's misnamed.
That's true. And then relationship management, ongoing.
Yep. That's like, a Salesforce, but you can look at a muck rack for relationship management with journalists.
With journalists, yeah.
I've got some clients who are sort of taking like a Microsoft Dynamics even and trying to customize that for influencer management or for like investor relations management.
That's, this whole idea of influencers, like the sheer number of stakeholder audiences that communicators have to deal with, just going back to something you said even way earlier on in our conversation, calls for so much differentiation in the way that we do our activities, but also such a need for tools to manage those stakeholders properly. Otherwise you end up forgetting some, or you focus, you over focus in one area, or you neglect others. It's too often done by, licking your finger and putting it in the air and seeing where the wind is blowing, right?
Absolutely. And then also think about if all those relationships live when someone's Rolodex are in their head and that person leaves your company.
Yeah.
I mean, the value that is lost.
Oh, of course. Yeah. It reminds me, like, even in the back in the day when I was in Japan, everything was done on business cards, right? Mm-hmm. And we were talking today about business cards in an unrelated conversation. I realized I haven't had a business card in 18 months.
Wow.
Like, just haven't had one. But I can get them done, get them printed, but it's kind of like, I don't know, I can use a Mobilio or something and just get it done right. But point is, right, that back then you had all of your contacts, everything was in a book of business cards, a Rolodex essentially. But your value was really when you went to a new company in Japan, your value was what's the thickness of that book? How many cards do you have? So there's no way you're going to leave that behind.
No.
There's no way you're putting that into somebody's database, right? So like, I like the idea that you have a good system, some software in place that, keeps that in the hands of the organization, and then you can keep your business cards, but at least you don't take all the IP with you,
Right. And it's not that you don't have personal relationships, but the company can continue those relationships after you leave.
Absolutely. There's so much here to think about. Look, there's we're sort of scratching the surface. I mean, we are giving a really good overview, I think, of what that ecosystem looks like. And, I don't expect too many of our listeners to go out and suddenly go, okay, I'm going to go and pick up Falcon today and start to figure out how to use it. But just to give an overview of what this whole thing looks like is it's the things that we have to contend with in this changing profession, So where do you see communications headed? Like, we're all becoming, to some degree, familiar with and comfortable with technology. Mm-hmm. It's a far cry from being a technologist, though, right? So do you think comms professionals need to all be technologists, or how do you think the profession is evolving now, given what you know?
I don't think communicators need to all be technologists. I do think communicators need to be technology literate. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, in our society and culture today, that's helpful in many parts of our life, not just at work. I do think companies probably need a technology team. I mean, a lot of my clients have within the communications function a CommTech team, who is helpful to them. And there's some friction with IT in that, like who gets to own that stuff. I would pick having data engineers on my team versus other types of technology roles, because I think the real value is getting the data, and then you need to be able to, write some SQL to manipulate your data in the way that you want. So if I had to pick like which of the technology skill sets to put in comms, I would keep the data engineering really close to the practitioners. I would recommend people who are mid and early career professionals go learn SQL. Doesn't mean you have to write it, but taking a SQL class will teach you to think in tables, to think in data. And then when you get a new tool, you'll be like, this is how it's structured in the back end. You don't have to write a single line of code to understand that.
It's such important advice. I wish I would have done that myself, but I get enough joy out of doing the Boolean that works. Huh? There's some things, like there's some tips and tricks, not just about capitalizing and between words. There's a lot that you can do there that requires a little bit of going back to my, college logic class, the if P's then Q's stuff.
It is literally that.
Yeah.
Technology is just your logic class. It is exactly that.
Yeah. And I didn't do that well in it, by the way. But well enough, you said something about, people with some like statistics knowledge and those kinds of analytical skills. I'm living proof that you don't have to necessarily have those like academically in your background, but you do need to be open to them. And I think, to a degree, one of those mindset things we were talking about earlier, in communications, you can no longer bank on being like fluffy for, that it's derogatory now, I think, for a lot of communicators to be called fluffy. Like there's not a lot of science behind what you do. There's no data to back you up. You have to become familiar with and comfortable with data and some math, just a little bit, so that you can understand, the differences. You can understand when you see data coming from other departments, especially, and just know like what it is that you're contending with. But most of all, just seeing and being able to compare the basic things like rates of conversion rates or click rates, or comparing one to another, engagement rates, just understanding the basics there. And I don't mean to be, again, like I don't mean to assume that communicators don't have the skills and that I'm sort of talking down. I'm not. I just have met enough people who claim, look, I became a communicator. I went into PR because I hate math. And I feel sad for those folks, because those days are over. If you want to have a career in communications, but you don't have to be a math person. You have to be a communicator that's open to it. It's open to some numbers and some data.
Yeah. I was a high school debater, which might not be a surprising piece of information, but
No.
it's all about logic and the logic games. And to me, persuasion and math, to me, they're the same thing, the same skill set. You're just using numbers adding up together instead of premises, to build your syllogism. And that's really how I think about it is how do I convince someone that 2 + 2 = 4 as a communicator? So I don't know, to me that they're actually really related. And so if someone says,
Mhm.
oh, I don't like math, that makes me sad because I suspect that if those people are excellent writers and excellent communicators, that they are also actually intuitively excellent at quantitative.
If you have an idea, if you're skilled enough to write, a couple of hundred words in the complexities of English syntax, give yourself a little credit.
Yeah.
You can go pretty far. I also think that what do they call it? The proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? When you start to look at data, numbers, with relation to CommTech, right? You're starting to go through something that's important to you. You have a question. You start with a question that you want to solve. You can think all you want, you can Google all you want, but then when you start to really look at the tools that we have available to us and you say, you know what, I think this thing might be able to answer my question, you start to go down this road. And then what ends up happening is you get into problem solving mode, into puzzle solving mode. Now, I always see myself and have been personality tested and, all that all those assessments I've done have again and again told me that I am a conceptual thinker. I am a little pie in the sky. I'm not always grounded in reality. I'm a visionary. And, that could be interpreted as I don't like to get down into the details. And that is very true. But there's something about finding the solution to a problem with a really clear kind of data-based and mathematical kind of answer that you're like, okay, man, maybe I didn't like the process as much getting here. Maybe I wasn't so joyful, like going, oh man, I got to crunch all these numbers or I have to go through all these graphs. But I'll tell you something, once you get through all that and you look at what you have at the end, there's the level of satisfaction is incredible, especially if you're like, you consider yourself a word person all the time. You're like, holy crap, I can do that. So, once that sort of happened to me many years ago, that's when I really started to give a lot more credence to, you know what, maybe I mistreated myself. Maybe I certainly was mistaken about myself in that I don't like math meant something. The I don't like math doesn't mean anything. I'm not good at math is an unfortunate blocker, right? It's one of those belief systems, those BS things that you have to get over.
That's right.
Right? It's really about, opening yourself into that growth mindset that we said before, right? And being open to figuring these things out. And that I think kind of is where CommTech is and what it's about. There's so much going on there, but fundamentally communicators have to embrace that world more,
Yes, I agree.
So I can't believe that we've been already talking for an hour. There's so much more I want to talk about with you. And we didn't even get into Web3. I'm going to have to do that separately with you, because I think there's a lot happening in that space that, especially if you're a CommTech person, like we're going to have to account for the way that people interact now when they are, going to be able to be more anonymous, give us less information, but at the same time, be able to validate, what we do and what they do using the blockchain. So, as communicators, we're going to have to cope with the fact that there's going to be a point where, when a company says, no, we've sourced those diamonds from the right place, that a quick check, using the blockchain will be able to validate that or not. There's no spin on that, right? So, the days of spin should be over already. But CommTech, I think, is putting a nice nail in that coffin. Numbers don't lie. Web3 is going to put more nails in that coffin. So I think it's only good for communicators to get there. But anyway, that's just just my thoughts at the moment. I think we got to get to it another time, Brittany, because there's so much more I want to talk to you about,
That
honestly.
sounds great. I'd love to do it again.
Awesome.
One thing I do want to suggest to the listeners out there, a book called How to Lie with Statistics.
How to Lie with Statistics.
Yes. Daryl Huff. If you read that book, I think you'll be a lot more comfortable with the numbers. It kind of tells you what not to do. And you'll start to suddenly see all of the ways that things are being spun. So if people say words can be spun, numbers can be spun too. And so I think it's powerful. One thing a good lesson for people to kind of think about is every time you see a chart, like a bar chart, look to see if the bottom axis is 0 or not.
Oh.
Like if you see polling numbers or you see the difference between, two outcomes, is that bottom line a 0? Sometimes it's a 90 and one bar is 91 and one bar is 98 and they look miles apart and they're actually both above 90%.
Those charts are people always play games with those charts when you mess with the scale. Always look at the absolute numbers on those charts. That's right. It's a really great lesson. I also wanted to point people to another resource, which I think is really great. And it's more on the marketing side, but go subscribe to Chris Penn. If you know Chris Penn, the work that he does with analytics and and statistics and, on the marketing side, but actually in the communication side too, he's all across and a real thought leader. I would just suggest subscribing to his newsletters. And there's tons of stuff. Go to the Page Society.
Yes.
Check out Page Learning Lab. If you're not a subscriber, try to get in there and look at some of the videos. You will see both of us on them, in them, and other great people. For more about Brittany Paxman, go check her out on LinkedIn, and her name will be spelled properly in the episode title. Check out her company, which is Point 600, and it is POINT 600 point600.com. Brilliant organization. I love her focus here and her niche. And I'm learning to say that properly. I always say niche, but 6 in one hand, you know what they say. But the whole idea of modernizing corporate comms and the way she's doing it, I do recommend everybody would take a look at point600.com. Where else can people find you, Brittany? What have I missed? Any of the socials? Where are you at?
I am on Twitter, but LinkedIn is the primary place. And then, the company, that's the heart and soul right now.
And I'm so glad that you said that, and I'll circle back to this for our very last thing, that it's the most fun you've ever had. I want you to continue to have that much fun. And I hope you do. I really am looking forward to working with you more on some of the CommTech projects that we have coming up through Page, and maybe elsewhere as well. So, is there any last words, Brittany, before we say our farewells?
I just want to say thank you. This was so fun to chat about this. You got me thinking about some new things as well, and I really enjoyed the time.
Awesome. And if you're a patient listener, you lasted this long, I will just fill you on one last little tidbit. Brittany's first ever podcast interview.
That's true.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Very exciting.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for listening to the Dan Nessel Show. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. People always ask me, why do I do the show? I do it for the ratings. I do it for your validation. So do me a favor. Go over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or someplace else, wherever you're listening to podcasts, and subscribe, leave a review, rate me, and share with your friends. Anything you can do to spread the word, I deeply appreciate it. Thanks again for listening to the Dan Nessel Show.